Hello, I'm Dennis Tucker, and I want to welcome you to another Bible study. I preach for the Lilac Road Church of Christ in Richfield, Kentucky, and at the end of this, I will invite you to come be with us. But if you have any questions, any comments, I'd be glad to hear from you. My desire personally, so we stay together for the Word of God. And this morning, in the first lesson for this day, and this is going to be aired originally on the Sunday before Thanksgiving in 2021. Let's talk about ingredients being thankful. This lesson here, in a lot of ways, is a companion lesson that dovetails with the general idea. But as I talk about, in particular, contentment. And so Sheryl Crow had a song she recorded a number of years ago called "Life Under the Sun," or "Life in the Sun," and she talked about, I'm going to soak up the sun. Actually, may have been the title of that. But I thought about the words of that song when I was putting together this lesson. And here's a few of the words of that song. It said, "My friend our communist holds meetings in his RV. I can't afford his gas, so I'm stuck here watching TV. I don't have digital. I don't have diddly squat. It's not having what you want, it's wanting what you got. I'm going to soak up the sun. I'm going to tell everyone to lighten up. I'm going to tell them that I got no one to blame for every time I feel lame, I'm looking up. I'm going to soak up the sun." And that deals with the idea of contentment. Not having what you want, but wanting what you got. And contentment, when you think about it, we live in a time of prosperity, a time, in fact, my generation has enjoyed some of the best times as far as materially of the United States. You have food in the refrigerator, have cars to drive, we have clothes put on, we have houses to live in, we have entertainment, and you just start listening all the good things we have here. But yet you look around, you find that people are often complaining, wanting more something, wanting to receive something else. Yet the happiest people I know are people who are grateful and content. Now, enemies of contentment are things like envy and covetousness and greed. Those things are talked about in the Bible as being things we are to avoid. Contentment is defined as a state of being content. Okay, the state of being content means satisfaction, ease of mind. Now, it's not to be confused with the idea of complacency and not caring about things, but it is the idea of being able to set back what you have and having an ease of mind about you. And when I was thinking about contentment, King Saul comes up as far as the discontented king. And we read about King Saul in relationship to David. In 1 Samuel 17 chapter, David comes up to see his brothers that the army of Israel is basically in a stalemate with the Philistines. And for many days, the Philistines had this giant man come out by the name Goliath. I'm sure you heard about him. Big, tall guy, really strong, really powerful, and a great warrior. Okay? And this guy would come out and he would challenge the children of Israel. You choose your best soldier and we'll have a one-on-one duel, basically. We'll fight it out. And if you win, we'll bow down to you. If we win, you're going to serve us. And so David, as he hears about this, in 1 Samuel 17, chapter verse 28, it says, "So it was when the Philistine arose and came out, drew near to meet David, that David hastened and ran toward the army to meet the Philistine." Now, David accepts the challenge. So he goes out there and he's going to, and although he's not really a soldier, although he's a youth, and although he's not really wearing armor, he's going out there and meet this guy one-on-one. And so verse 49 said, "Then David put his hand into his bag and took out a stone and he slung it and struck the Philistine's forehead so that the stone sank into his forehead and he fell on his face to the earth." That David had killed Goliath. He takes the sword of Goliath, chops off his head, and so that's it. The victory is his. I mean, the victory, Goliath is nil no longer. And as a result, then, in honestly, David being praised by the people. And you go in the 18th chapter, we find some of what's being said here. In verse 6, it says, "Now it happened, as they were coming home, when David was returning from the slaughtered Philistine, that the women had come out of all the cities of Israel, singing and dancing to meet King Saul with tambourines and with joy and with musical instruments. So the women sang as they danced, and said, Saul has slain his thousands, and David his 10,000s. Then Saul was very angry, and the saying displeased him, and he said, They have ascribed to David 10,000s, and to me have ascribed only thousands. Now what more can he have but the kingdom? So Saul eyed David from that day forward. You see, Saul's way of interpreting this is that David was now a threat to his kingdom, that they were praising David more than they were praising Saul. And so, as I said there, that from that time onward, everything he looked at was kind of like with an evil eye as far as David. In fact, Saul saw enemy as such a David, they went to the point of trying to kill him in 1 Samuel 18, chapter verse 11. And Saul cast a spear, for he said, I would pin David to the wall. But David escaped his presence twice. And so Saul, from that time onward, lacked contentment. And now Saul had a lot to be happy about. And he started to think about it, that he was the king of Israel. God had selected him. God had anointed him to be king of Israel. David had not been anointed king of Israel yet. That the big enemy of Israel now was gone. And that Goliath, who had kept Saul's army at bay for, I want to say about 40 days, that he is now gone. And this was one military victory. And for David, but Saul had many military victories. If you go back and read chapters, like chapter 13, 14, 15, you'll find that Saul had victories on numerous occasions. And so if Saul had simply been willing to basically praise God, be thankful to God for what David had done, everything would have been good. If Saul been content with doing that. If you go 1 Samuel 17, verse 46, back up this here, and we see that David stressed the Lord as he's talking about what had happened, or what was going to happen. He said, This day the Lord will deliver you into my hand, and I will strike you and take your head from you. And this day I will give you the carcasses of the camp of the Philistines, the birds of the air, and the wild beasts of the earth, that all the earth may know that there is a God in Israel. See, David here is not stressing how great of a warrior he is. What he is stressing is that God was going to be the one give him the victory. God is the God of Israel. And yet Saul, as he looked at this, that all he could see was that David's now a threat to me. And because David is receiving praise from people and not Saul. Have you ever known people like that? Have you ever known people that when somebody else receives praise or somebody else receives some recognition, that their first response is to be envious, is to be hateful towards them, is to say, well, he may have done something good, but I tell you what, that person, they got their faults too. The first thing they try to do is knock you down. If somebody does something good and somebody receives praise, there's always somebody out there that's willing to try to knock you down when that happens. And so we look here and we find that the story does not end well for King Saul. And so contentment is something that we need to have, or we could be much like King Saul, because King Saul to me is truly one of the most saddest characters in all the Bible, how it winds up with him. And so let's talk about as far as what we have. Okay, now when we get grieved things in the world, bad things happen. And that we have to realize, Jesus in the Sermon on the Mount may not have used the word contentment there, but he talks about the idea of being content with what we have in this world in the Sermon on the Mount. And Paul talks about the idea of contentment and the blessings of contentment. In 1 Timothy 6, verse 6, now godliness with the contentment is great gain. It's much like an equation. And as you have godliness plus contentment equals great gain. And they have to have both those together. But contentment is part of that equation of great gain, of being content with what you have. And contentment's not always easy. It'd be great if it was easy. If it was easy, then I wouldn't have to talk about it, right? But you look at the idea of contentment, and we think about Paul as he writes the Philippian letter. Paul had been in prison, and many believe that at the time of the writing of the Philippian letter, he had been released under house arrest, or maybe been allowed a little bit of opportunity to move around that time. But Paul had gone through a lot in his life, and yet in Philippians 4th chapter, verse 12, that Paul says, I know how to be abased. Now, abased means to basically have nothing. And it says, I know how to abound. He said, gone from having nothing to having great, from having a lot to having nothing at all. And everywhere in all things, I learned both to be full and to be hungry. That there's times he had plenty to eat, and other times his stomach churned within him, and you kind of understand what he's talking about. Both to abound and to suffer need. To have where he was just a little bit hungry, he was really hungry. He was just a little bit in need, he was really in need. And he says, I can do all things through Christ that strengthens me. I can do all things through Christ that strengthens me. And that is that no matter what the situation is, Paul was focused on Christ, and that was what gave him strength in his life. Now again, Paul, in writing this, may have been in prison, in a stinking Roman prison without hardly anything to eat. He may have been under house arrest where he could not go around, and he may have been out traveling around a little bit, but whatever it was, Paul was okay with it. Now again, it's easy to be content when we think we have everything we want. If I have plenty of food in the refrigerator, easier to be content. If I drive a nice car, easier to be content. If my house is up to my standards, whatever I think it needs to be, easier to be content. But what if when I don't have all those things? What if my refrigerator put up and it's empty? What if my house is cold? What if my car is not the newest car? You know, that's when people ought to start complaining and start talking about how unfair life is in life. And Paul does not do that. Again, why? Because it says godliness with contentment is great gain. It wasn't based on how much he had. Contentment wasn't based on how much Paul had. Contentment came from what? Serving Christ. And so a life without contentment is one that is not good. It can bring about the yearnings of wanting more and more, never being satisfied of and dissatisfaction can cause great harm. In 1 Timothy 6, verse 9, and you start reading there, he says, but those who desire to be rich fall into temptation and a snare, and to many foolish and harmful lusts which drown men in destruction and perdition. For the love of money is the root of all kinds of evil, for which some have strayed from the faith, and the greediness and pierced themselves through many sorrows. Now, you think about what he's saying there, and that is that those who desire to be rich fall into temptation and a snare, and mean, foolish, or harmful lusts, which drown men in destruction and perdition. Have you known people that it seemed like they had everything? In fact, sometimes it's even the rich and famous. The people that we think, well, they would have everything. I mean, they're making so much more money than I am, and they have bigger houses than I have, and yet you find they do things that are really self-destructive, that maybe they decide to kill a business partner, maybe they decide to embezzle money, more money, they have plenty of money, but maybe they're not simply satisfied with being the backup quarterback on the team and playing for $500,000 a year or $2 million or $3 million a year, not having to play. Actually, they're not satisfied, but they want more and more. And it says that the love of money presents all kinds of evil. And so we read about those often in the news that we would think that of anybody in the world, they would be the content ones. And yet we find that they're not. And a lot of times they do themselves harm in trying to get a little bit more. There was an article many years ago, Reader's Digest, and written by a lady who has served some of the elite people, the rich and famous. And her observation was that those people were about the same as everybody else. Money did not make them happy. Money did not make them content. Money did not make them sleep better at night. Money did not make their car, the satisfaction of their car or their mattress, whatever. That was not all about money. Money does not buy happiness, and it can create hardships. So let's make some points of application here, and then the study go with. And the first point of application is we need to be content with the recognition we receive. Now, again, about everyone at one time or another has felt as if somebody else got recognition that they deserve. Our group of friends around, and I may say, let's go to a certain place to eat. Nobody responds. And then somebody else says, hey, folks, how about we go to a certain place to eat? Same thing I just got through saying, but everybody chimes in and says, yeah, okay. Or maybe in solving a problem, I say, here's what we need to do. And 5 minutes later, a person says, well, here's what I think we need to do. And essentially the same thing that you just got through saying, and everybody stands back and says, man, that is amazing that you just said that. And they receive all kinds of praise, and you're thinking, why is they receiving the praise and I'm not? And what we have to understand is that don't be jealous when that happens. It happens to everybody, first of all. I don't know if anybody has not had that occurrence. And so don't be jealous in those kind of situations. In 1 Peter 2, verse 1, it says, therefore, lay aside. And that is, just put it away. Lay aside all malice, all deceit, hypocrisy, envy, and all evil speaking. As newborn babes, desire the pure milk of the word you may grow. Notice there, it starts with lay aside. Cast that out. Don't have anything to do with it. Resentment and envy brings simply misery. If that's the kind of life you're going to live, you're going to be miserable. If you look at somebody doing something, receiving something, and you think, I should be mine, I'm going to tell you, you're going to be a miserable person. And Proverbs 14, verse 30 says, a sound heart is life to the body, but envy is rottenness to the bones. I found it ironic. I can remember a quote, and I actually thought that maybe Ronald Reagan had said it. And then I was looking up, I found out that actually the first source I looked at said it was John Wooden, the legendary coach of UCLA basketball. But actually, I looked a little farther, and it said Harry S. Truman said this. And you may wonder what's the quote, then that's what we talk about. The quote is, it is amazing what you can accomplish if you do not care who gets the credit. And I thought about that, just how ironic that I don't know who said it first. Harry Truman may not even been the first one to say that. But that's true. It's amazing how much can get accomplished when you don't care who gets the credit. Be content with the recognition you receive. The second thing is be contentment with who you are with. And that is be content with your spouse. Marriages are breaking up. We look and you see the statistics of marriages, well, about half of the marriages end in divorce. And a lot of people say, why is that? And I realize there are many reasons because of that, but often marriage breaks up because somebody starts having a wandering eye. They start looking, and this little thing over here is a little bit prettier. Or this guy over here, he's a little bit nicer. Or that person there just has a better personality. And after a while, they start thinking about leaving their spouse and upgrading, getting a newer version of what they have, a better version of what they have right now. Now, keep in mind, the Bible says, and worldly philosophy is, if you're not happy, find somebody else. You go to marriage counselor and say, I'm not satisfied, my wife or my husband and I, we're not getting along. One of the things that marriage counselors often will say is, well, maybe you just need to get somebody else. Okay, the Bible says there's only one reason for divorce. And I don't go into a long lesson on marriage divorce at this time, but Luke 16, verse 18, whoever divorces his wife and marries another commits adultery, and whoever marries his divorced from her husband commits adultery. Now, I know there are marriages that end because of adultery. I know there are cases where that happens, so I'm not questioning that. But what we have to realize is that many times that's not the reason. Many times the person says, I'm not happy. Again, maybe it's just not working out the way that I want to. And what we have to keep in mind is be content with the one you have. It means a number of things. One is respect the vows you've taken. Whenever I have done a wedding, and I will grant you I have not done that many, but whenever I've done a wedding, and most of the ways to go to, as a well-known line is, do you take this person to be a lawful widow wife? And then these conditions are placed of sickness and poor, or sickness and health, wealth or poor. I'm messing up all these the sayings. But we give these conditions that is good and bad. Young and old, health, sickness, prosperity, being poor. And we get all these, and we acknowledge the fact that we're going to be faithful and true to that marriage no matter what situation may have. You need to be true to your vows. Hebrews 13, verse 4 says, marriage is honorable among all, and the bed undefiled, but fornicators and adulterers God will judge. You enter in that marriage relationship, you need to keep your vows. You need to do what you promised to do. And you need to, if something in your marriage is not right, you need to work on yourself. You need to work on being a better spouse, being a husband, being a better wife, a better listener, a better confidant, whatever it is. But you need to find joy in your marriage. You need to work on it. Be content with the one you have. I know many people that have left their spouses, and the next spouse is not any better, and they go to another spouse, not any better. And the reason because there wasn't anything wrong with that first spouse is that they were not content. Another thing is how we worship. Be content with how we worship. And that is the thing about the fact of King Saul, earlier in 1 Samuel 13th chapter, decided to change the worship for a matter of expediency. And that is, in 1 Samuel 13th chapter, his army is gathered together, and they're going to fight again on another occasion. And they're waiting for the prophet to come, Samuel to come. And Samuel's delayed, not coming when King Saul thought he should be there. So verse 9, it says, so Saul said, bring a burnt offering and peace offerings here to me. And he offered the burnt offering. Now it happened as soon as he had finished presenting the burnt offering that Samuel came, and Saul went out to meet him, and they might greet him. And Samuel said, what have you done? And Saul said, when I saw that the people were scattered from me, and you did not come within a days appointed, and that the Philistines gathered together at Michmash, then I said the Philistines would now come down on me at Gilgal, and have not made supplication to the Lord. Therefore I felt compelled and offered a burnt offering. And Samuel said to Saul, you have done foolishly. You have not kept the command which the Lord your God had, which he commanded you. For now the Lord will have established your kingdom over Israel forever. But now your kingdom shall not continue. The Lord has sought for himself a man to his own heart, and the Lord has commanded him to be a commander over his people, because you have not kept what the Lord commanded you. And that is what? Okay, King Saul knew the one to offer sacrifice was a priest. A priest had to be a Levite. King Saul was the tribe of Benjamin. He had no authority, no right to offer that sacrifice. But he did it because he felt compelled. It was a matter of expediency. Instead of waiting to do what God said to do, it was easier for him to go ahead and make the sacrifice. And we find out that did not please God. And as I said here, that God would take away his kingdom from him. Now, people will often want to change things and serve to God and worship God to be more convenient. And really what that means is to be more what they wanted to be. But what we want and what God wants are two different things. And God prescribes what worship is. When we talk about worship, we're talking about praying to him. We're talking about singing songs to him. We're talking about as Lord in the Lord's Supper. We're talking about our giving to him. We're talking about our preaching to him. All that is involved in worship. But somebody may say, you know what, I think it'd be better if we got to change that a little bit. But God's the one that describes what worship is. In John 4, verse 24, to God is spirit, and those who worship him must worship in spirit and truth. In spirit and in truth. Both are essential. And so we have to let God decide what our worship is going to be like. And we have to do what God said to do, or else we'd be like King Saul. And that is, we'll have that taken away from us. God's fellowship taken away from us. The last thing here, we need to be content where we're going. And I'm talking about the idea of trying to go to heaven. There's people that, yes, they want to go to heaven, but they're not really content with that idea. There's so many other things they want in life. Now, you look at this thing about the problem with the Israelites. God had brought them out of Egypt. They got to see the plagues. They got to see the parting of the Red Sea. They crossed the Red Sea on dry ground. They go to Mount Sinai. And there they start complaining again. And they get to Mount Sinai. And what do they want to do? They want to go back to Egypt. And if you look over to Acts 7, verse 38, it said, this is he who was in the congregation wilderness where the angel spoke to him at Mount Sinai and with our fathers. The one who received the living oracles to give to us, whom our fathers would not obey, but rejected. And in their hearts, they turned back to Egypt. I think you just need to underline that in your Bible. With their hearts, they turned back to Egypt, saying to Aaron, make us gods to go before us. As for this Moses brought us up out of the land of Egypt, we do not know what has become of him. And they made a calf in those days, offered sacrifice to idol, and rejoiced in the works of their own hands. Now, God was leading them to the land of Canaan. God had, as I said before, had performed the 10 plagues. They got the witness. He had parted the Red Sea. He had brought them to Mount Sinai. They're on their way to the land of Canaan. And what they do? The hearts turned back to Egypt. They weren't content to go in the land of Egypt, or land of Canaan. They decided to go back to the land of Egypt. Some obey the gospel today, but they're not content with somebody striving to go to heaven, but their hearts are still in the world. We need to make sure our heart is still in the right place. We need to make sure our heart is content on living and serving God. In Hebrews 13, verse 5 says, let your conduct be without covetousness. Be content with such things that you have, for he himself has said, I will never leave you nor forsake you. And that is be content. God is with us. We need to practice that. We need to be content with what God has given to us and follow him, because as we travel down the pathway of life, there comes a reality and how temporary these things are in life. How each generation, I guess, tends to overemphasize their importance. I remember being part of the baby boomer generation, and in schools they would talk about we're the biggest generation that's ever been in this country, as the baby boomers born right after World War I and up to 1963, and we did receive a lot of attention. But now my baby boomer generation is passing away. And you start seeing the more important things are of the soul. And how blessed we are to have the goal of heaven before us. And never take your eye off that goal, off the prize of going to heaven. We need to be content to go there. I appreciate you watching. And I hope maybe again that you took the opportunity to write down any questions you have, to write down the verses, or if you need to like to have the sermon outline, you can go to our website. I don't usually mention that, but it is www, all lowercase letters, LRCOC.com. And that's our website. You'll find our sermon outlines and articles there, and also the YouTube link here to this lesson. I appreciate you watching. If you can, come be with us, Lilac Road. Our building is located at 1687 Lilac Road, Litchfield, Kentucky. Sunday morning at 9:30 we have Bible class, 10:25 is worship. Then Sundays at 5 p.m. we have worship, and on Wednesday nights at 7 p.m. we have Bible classes again. I appreciate you watching. Feel free to share this and also hit the like button. All right, thank you.